And we're back again. I said I'd be off basically social media silence until Saturday. But fortunately, things have swung in the right direction a little bit more than before, so at least you heard my voice today. I always thought about not even saying anything during the review because I've just been kind of out of it lately, but luckily, I guess this fits really well. The gods have opened up and they basically have granted me a little bit of a reprieve. So, that being said, we are going to talk about 2 new release movies this week. That's it. That's all we got this week is 2. There is a third one, but we don't have access to it yet, so hopefully soon we will.
What's that?
That's The Wind Rises. Its official release was this week, and Ernest and Celestine is next week.
Yeah, which means we won't be seeing them till like end of the year or something.
Nah, way after. Probably by the time the MTV Movie Awards come around.
I won't even bother reviewing them. It'll be that late.
I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? So, we're going to talk about a movie we watched last night and a movie we just got out of. So, AJ, take it away.
Alright, we're actually going to start with the movie we watched today.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Not what I was anticipating you'd do.
Our first movie's plot starts with the main character watches his family get butchered and then strung up by their limbs. And then he eventually gets taken into slavery. And then from the slavery, he gets put into an army of gladiators. And he has to fight in an arena. And he teams up with a big black guy, and they become allies. And sure enough, these gladiator fights are conducted by the person that had his family killed. No, I'm not talking about Gladiator, believe it or not. Sounds so familiar, though, doesn't it?
It really does.
We're talking about Pompeii. Okay, despite that, there's actually a parallel plot where instead of the emperor being the evil one that's conducting everything, it's actually a Roman senator who is played by Kiefer Sutherland. Because when I think of Romans, I totally think of Kiefer Sutherland.
You do now, apparently.
And there's a girl that kind of connects these stories, who is Emily Browning, who you may possibly remember from Sucker Punch, but most likely remember from Lemony Snicket. That's not even to go into Sleeping Beauty, but you may have heard about that.
Yes.
But anyway, she just happens to be there when our slave, who's played by Kit Harington from fucking Game of Thrones, and her horse falls. The wheel gets stuck in mud, and the horse falls over, and I guess breaks something, and it's pretty much gonna die. So nobleman Kit Harington comes over and snaps its neck, and to keep it from suffering, and she thinks this is the greatest thing she's ever seen in her life, so much so that she's fallen instantly in love. And unfortunately, this girl just also happens to be the object of affection for Roman Senator Kiefer, who is going to bring her into marriage or kill everyone in sight, including her parents, who are Jared Harris and Carrie-Anne Moss.
I can't have you, no one else will, apparently.
Yeah, she's all, she was in Rome for whatever reason. It kept reminding me of when they kept talking about Vincent Vega being in Amsterdam for no reason.
Yeah.
He was doing work for Marcel. Regardless, yeah, I just brought Pulp Fiction to Pompeii somehow.
Gotta do something to make it better.
For some reason, she was in Rome for God knows how long, and this is when she met Kiefer, and then Kiefer kind of followed her. And is basically going to take over. And there is this emperor who is basically Nero, is what he is. Mm-hmm. I don't even know who that actor was, but he was doing this. Let me get right into that. The acting in this movie is pretty bad, even when you have the likes of Kiefer Sutherland and Jared Harris in it. The good thing about Kiefer is I think he knew what kind of movie he was in, because the director of this is Paul W.S. Anderson, who did the fucking Resident Evil movies, and he did Alien vs. Predator, I think. this guy usually blows. Every now and then, the Resident Evil movies are getting a little better, and
Got another one coming out in October.
I think he did Soldier with Kurt Russell. That movie's kind of a guilty pleasure, but for the most part, I hate this guy's movies. Believe it or not, Mia Jovovich is in this though. But we'll also get into her a little bit in the next movie. But I think Kiefer knows what kind of movie he's in because he's doing the hammy over-the-top villain thing. I think he's doing an intentionally bad performance, like we talked about with Crow and Winter's Tale. Jared Harris and Carrie Ann Moss don't get much to do. Emily Browning just has to do the "I'm so smitten by this slave I don't know" thing. And Kit Harington's doing his, I'm sure people are going to... I think I've made it clear in a few videos. I don't know if anybody saw those, but I don't care for Game of Thrones.
Yes.
I really don't. And I'm sure people will probably tell me, oh, you just need to watch Game of Thrones. I have, and I don't care. Kit Harington to me is basically... I felt like if Game of Thrones wasn't popular, this part probably would have gone to Orlando Bloom. And Harrington's performance reminded me a lot of an Orlando Bloom performance, which is...
Troy.
That and Kingdom of Heaven came to mind.
Yeah.
We're supposed to basically buy this guy. This guy... Honestly, these guys look like pussies.
Yeah.
But we're supposed to buy that there are these hardcore, hard-ass warriors that can kill anything in sight and are these heroic, tough heroes. And I don't know what the casting director was on, but it never worked for Orlando Bloom. It's not going to work for him either. So... Basically, what it all comes down to, a lot of it, like him and especially this Roman Emperor, or not Roman Emperor, but the Kiefer's the Roman Senator, this guy. It's basically like, I guess it's what I'm going to call YouTube acting. It's where basically he gave the exact same performance as some fat guy you'd see on YouTube wearing a sheet as a toga. You'd get the same performance.
Yeah.
And not that these movies are performance pieces or anything, but it doesn't help when the acting is bad.
No.
I know the acting is like, second or third on the totem pole when it comes to making these kind of movies. But, you see a movie like Gladiator, it can do all of them. It can do the effects, it can do the drama, and it can do the acting all in one thing. It doesn't have to just focus on the effects or just focus on whatever. Not to mention the fact that this movie is so, this movie just doesn't care about dialogue at all, it's just got to keep piling on plot. So not only do you have the Gladiator ripoff plot, and you have the Kiefer wants to marry her, force her into marriage plot, all of this is happening with an impending volcano just glooming in the background.
Yep.
Just knowing that certain doom is coming. And that's what the whole movie basically builds up to. The entire first hour of the movie is just killing time until that volcano erupts.
Mm-hmm.
And you know it does because it's the poster. Well, I will say a couple of things about the effects. Like I said, Paul W.S. Anderson, not to be confused with Paul Thomas Anderson or Wes Anderson at all, makes really crappy movies, but every now and then, even in the Resident Evil movies, he is capable of a decent shot every now and then. Even though a lot of this movie looks really... This is the first movie in a while we actually saw in 3D, only because we didn't have any other choice.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3D actually the only reason the movie's in 3D is because of the volcano scenes.
The ash on the screen.
Yeah, they really, really use that.
Big time.
The problem is how I say a lot, I just talked about in the RoboCop review, nowadays a lot of big special effects movies look too cartoony because the movies are so effects heavy they get lazy after a while.
Yeah.
It's like they give up on the effects halfway through. It's really goddamn windy.
Yeah. That annoys me every once in a while when that hits the glass.
And the problem is that the 3D makes... This happens to most movies. If your effects aren't that... I mean, a lot of the effects are fine, particularly towards the end.
Mm.
But the effects that aren't so good look even worse in 3D.
Yeah.
And they just look like little animations just running amok. And there's the whole, it's grounded by a PG-13 rating. Which, like I talked about before with Braveheart and Gladiator, you don't necessarily have to be a bloodbath to be effective, but there's something about it that adds to it. Like, it's really distracting at the very beginning. It happens throughout the movie, but it's really apparent in the beginning. People are getting... Obviously, the way they fought back in these times is with swords and knives and anything that had a blade of some sort, or anything sharp.
Mm.
And you see people getting sliced left and right and falling over. There's not even a hint of blood.
Nope.
And like I said, you don't have to be, drenched in blood to be effective, but that's clearly... something's clearly missing. Like, the big moment where, at the very beginning, Kiefer cuts his mom's throat. You see Kiefer swing his sword, and you see the kid look shocked, and the mom falls over, and the camera shows from her, chin up. Because they can't show the wound with the PG-13 rating. It's like the scene in The Dark Knight where he kills Michael Jai White.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody knows exactly what happened, because they couldn't show it. So, that's a problem. Another problem would be... Okay, I don't know exactly how to make this criticism sound. So I just had to brand it with a term I just made up on the spot. I hope you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to try to explain it the best I can, without fucking up, but it's something that I've dubbed hero porn.
Mm-hmm.
And what I consider to be hero porn is you have a couple of characters, okay? A lot of movies are like this. For some reason, the other first thing that comes to mind is Brendan Fraser in the Mummy movies.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, it seemed like every 5 minutes in this movie, they wanted their characters to seem really... They really, really wanted to beat you over the head with how noble these characters are. And how in awe you should be of their selfless heroism, that's the word.
Yeah.
So every 5 minutes, we get this, it seems, we get this big scene where one of the main characters does a really big, unselfish act in slow motion, and we're supposed to be in awe at how awe-inspiringly heroic they are. And like I said, of course you want your main characters to be heroic, but you don't want to feel like the people who made the movie are beating you over the head with, look how selfless our big heroes are. They're like trying to be these, these big, legendary heroic things, but it just doesn't, none of them really work.
No.
The bravery and all of that shit. I think that goes back to the Kit Harington criticism. Because, if it had been somebody more appealing, maybe, it would have been easier to buy.
Gerard Butler. You really want to go there?
There's also a particular moment at the very beginning, like I said, where there's... the ground is drenched in blood, but you never actually see it come out of anybody. And there's a whole bunch of guys in there with swords, and they bring out Kit Harington by himself, and you're like, oh my god, he's gonna get mangled because there's only one of him and 10 of them.
Nope.
But no, he does the big badass thing where he kills them all, and he drops the sword, and he walks out like he's all badass.
He is John Cena of this movie.
No.
Yes.
But, let's talk about the last 45 minutes or so. After the hour of killing time has happened. Finally, the volcano erupts, and all shit breaks loose. and there's a whole bunch of action pretty much from beginning to end, and it's okay. It's clear, it's clear that they completely blew their load in this last 45 minutes. They didn't give a fuck what was in the first hour. They just wanted to get to this as fast as they could.
Yep.
And the problem, I think, with that is, I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm just suggesting this might happen. I think with general audiences, like just normal moviegoers, I think because the last 45 minutes is so fantastical, this movie might end up with a slightly better reputation than it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are going to go out of the theater and remember that last 45 minutes and how blown away they were by it. They're not going to think to tell their friends, oh yeah, the first hour is kind of a joke.
Tell me something happened in the first hour. You can't? But you'll rave about that 45 minutes, right?
And it's basically, well, like I said before, the first hour is just Gladiator. That's all it is.
Yeah.
No tigers, though. So that's... the volcano budget wouldn't allow it.
Yes.
It took everything. So, that's basically what that is. I mean, there are some genuinely pretty good moments towards the end. And it's surprisingly got a good ending.
Mm.
But it's not enough to make you forget that first hour. And like I said, the hero form really comes in for the last half as well. So there's always that bringing you down. Like, I think that wouldn't be a problem if they had a more appealing hero. And this love story that they've thrown into it that comes from nothing. There's one scene where there's the scene where he kills the horse and makes her wet. And then there's this other moment where, sorry to get graphic on you there, there's about a 20-second scene where he's there and he's on a horse. And she's there and she's like, oh, free me from my having to do the fucking I'm a princess, my life sucks cliche.
Yep.
Or whatever it was she was. So he picks her up on the horse and takes her on a ride for 20 seconds before they get caught by Kiefer's guys. And I guess it's like their version of the carpet ride in Aladdin. It lasts for 20 seconds, and for that 20 seconds they're on the horse, she's like, oh my god, this guy can show me freedom forever. I guess. This woman's very easy to please.
Yes.
I don't know why Kiefer had such a hard time, because this girl doesn't take a whole lot. So, yeah, and that's pretty much, like I said, despite the fact that the love story is kind of just there, and there's really no ground to it whatsoever, the ending is kind of, for a movie like this, the ending is kind of,
Are you using the words poetic?
I don't know. It's an ending that's better than the movie it's in, for sure.
It's an ending of a much better movie.
Yeah. So, that's pretty much what Pompeii is. If you want to, so, like I said, I think the ending will give it a better, it's like, it reminds me of Black Swan. The ending will give it a much better reputation than it deserves.
Oh.
So, that's pretty much Pompeii.
Two things, real quick.
It's not. I guess it's not as bad as it looks, but there's more bad than good, sadly.
Number one, if you're a wrestling fan, the Emperor at the end looks like Ethan Carter III. And number two, just movies like this, I can't get into. You really have to get me. Like, the original 300, for some reason, is something I actually enjoyed. I don't know why. Look at me, you probably couldn't tell that. But I actually enjoyed 300. But all these other, like, wannabe Gladiator movies just don't work for me. And if you can captivate me right away, that's good. But this one didn't. So the whole time, I felt like Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, I was trying to escape from Pompeii. Great ride, by the way, if you guys ever got a chance to check it out back in the day.
Alright. Our second and final movie is 3 Days to Kill. It's worth noting, I didn't know anything about 3 Days to Kill when we walked into
the general public doesn't.
There was I think there was one trailer for it. I think the trailer was in front of one movie. The whole run before it came out.
And they're starting to promote it heavily, like, the week before, and that was the first time I saw anything TV-wise for it.
Yeah, I didn't know the plot.
Nope.
The only thing I could keep thinking of was The Next 3 Days, the Paul Haggis movie with Russell Crowe and Elizabeth Banks.
Interesting.
But it's not like that.
No.
3 Days to Kill is actually a pun of a title.
Mm-hmm.
Because, obviously, Costner is like a hitman of sorts.
CIA.
And, And, he's actually left with his daughter, who is Haley Steinfeld. And, her mom is going to be gone for the next 3 days. So, Haley Steinfeld comes out and says, so, Dad, we've got 3 days to kill.
Yeah.
I didn't know this going in, but if I didn't know by the... Like, if there weren't even any credits to this movie, I would have just known immediately. This movie is a... we talked about this when The Family came out. I'm not 100% sure on how... where the emphasis on his name goes. Mm-hmm. It's the guy that did Leon in The Fifth Element.
Yeah.
And Revolver. Luc Besson, I think is how you say it.
I believe so.
Sure.
You could definitely tell the influence just a second into the movie.
He is all over this movie.
Completely.
Despite the fact that the director is actually McGee, who's famous for... He did Charlie's Angels, Terminator Salvation, and We Are Marshall, to name a few.
And of course he was, like, infamously name-dropped by Christian Bale in the infamous clip on YouTube.
McGee, why don't you have somebody watching it? So, basically what this movie is it's a Luc Besson movie. Mm-hmm. All over. It's basically, Costner works for the CIA, and then the first action scene, first big action scene, he's obviously really sick, and we don't know what his deal is. He just can't stop coughing. And he's starting to, like, his vision's getting blurry. And
he's hallucinating.
He's falling over on the job, and he's after this guy that's, he's going after this villain named the Albino.
This guy's awesome. Which
is really funny because I saw an article, just everybody's all up in arms about everything anymore. Apparently an article was recently released where they were talking about, is the movie Foul Play offensive now? That movie's from like 1976 and also has a villain named the Albino, who is an albino.
We'll just call him James Carville, you'll be fine.
Well, if you were offended by Foul Play now for some reason, 40 years later or so, same thing more or less. And he's after this unseen villain, starting to sound like Ride Along now.
Yeah.
Called the Wolf, who is the guy that got beaten to death by Eli Roth at the beginning of Inglourious Basterds. And I'm not just saying that, it's really the same actor. Didn't just look like him, it really was. Mm-hmm. Well, after the mission goes awry, Costner goes to the doctor to see what's wrong with him. And it turns out he's got, like, a brain tumor, and he's got 15 months. Yeah, I, too, expected the doctor to say you have 3 days. But no, that's not where the title comes from.
No.
The plot perfectly set up for that, I guess, because, you know, I don't think anybody's ever gone in for a brain tumor, and the doctor literally says you have days.
You have 3 days.
Unless they go in really, they just hold it off that long. But anyway, so he decides he's going to reconcile with his neglected daughter. And yes, this neglected daughter goes into every single possible cliche you can think of. Mm-hmm. And his ex-wife?
Yeah. Well, I think he still calls her his wife, so I don't know.
Speaking of Gladiator, this is Connie Nielsen.
Yep.
And obviously, of course, really bringing back feels of Leon. He basically has to bond with this girl while finishing his mission.
Yes.
He doesn't teach her to kill, though. He's trying to keep his CIA life and his brain tumor from her. Because, you know, it's gonna be great later when all movie people seem to think the longer you drag it out, the better. So when you tell them at the very last minute, oh, by the way, I'm probably gonna die soon, but it's a good thing we finally caught up after all these years. Generally, they're not happy, but I'm not saying whether that scene comes or not, but it's always looming because that's the story.
He teaches her how to punch.
Yeah. So, and then the movie goes from there. And in true fashion of his movies, especially The Family, the movie is fun, but there's a lot wrong with it. This felt like I feel like I'm criticizing The Family all over again because I'm pretty much going to say the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
When the action is there, it's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
It's like a real action movie. But there's also, like, there's a lot of comedy in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of comedy. And much like in The Family, it doesn't... I mean, I know this is this guy's style and everything, but I'm still not used to it. It's just... The tone for this movie is all off.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got hardcore action movie, you've got bonding with neglected daughter, you've got weird, absurd comedy, and you've got tragedy, my impending death is coming. And, I don't know. And, obviously the main plot, after all this is, there is a way that he can stay alive. And that involves Amber Heard. And she basically plays this mysterious woman who says, I have a cure for your brain tumor.
Yep.
An experimental drug. And she will give it to him if he kills people for her.
Yes.
And this just happens to somehow leak back into the original story with the wolf and the albino. Because that's just what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Conveniently. And so that's pretty much the story. Your very uneven story. Let's first talk about the fact that this movie is PG-13.
How?
This really, it stays within the confines of PG-13, but barely. It's like right there. There are, like I said, the violence is really hardcore,
Yep.
and brutal, but there's not a whole lot of blood.
No.
Let's talk about the fact, in the first 5 minutes,
Yes.
the albino assassinates a woman. And the way he assassinates the woman is he opens an elevator shaft, and the elevator's already up, and he holds her over the open door so that the elevator comes down and decapitates her. That's just the start of the brutal violence. There's 2 uses of fuck, which is just barely on the line. I think the limit is 3.
It is.
Which-
For PG-13, it's 3.
Few movies have really pushed, like, As Good as It Gets comes to mind. And there's female nudity for, like, a few seconds at, like, a strip club. So yeah, they went as, and also,
Forgot about the tattoo parlor.
yeah. And
That's
also,
real nudity.
and also, there is a, this reminds me of Domestic Disturbance, but a lot of movies have this problem. The Ghost Rider, too. Those moments in movies where you can really tell the ADR is different, where clearly, there's like 3 different times where Costner almost says, what the fuck, and it abruptly cuts off.
Yep.
And then there's like this particular thing where Amber Heard says a line, and she just really clearly did not actually say that.
No, not even close.
This movie's post-production looked like it was really fast. So, it's not like this movie's box office really needed anything. I don't think it's going to do that well. I don't know why they felt the need to really push for the PG-13 or anything.
Yeah, they could have done an R on this easily.
But, you know, whatever. Another problem is, this kind of also goes in with the, this may just me being a downer, I don't know, but, I feel like a lot of scenes, the comedy tries a little too much. Like, when you watch movies like The Family, or I don't remember much about his other movies, because I've only seen them once, but The Family's still fresh in my mind, vaguely.
Yeah.
That was a contradiction, but...
Yeah.
What it feels like is the dialogue is trying too hard to be clever, and almost like I guess, Tarantino-like.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a scene where Amber Heard looks different every time we see her because she's supposed to be blending in and mysterious. At one point, she actually has the Mia Wallace hair, which is actually from the, I can't remember the actress's name that was in Pandora's Box, but it actually originates from there. It could be a reference to either one.
And there was a trunk, too. More Tarantino.
But the dialogue is trying really hard to be, like, clever and funny amidst its thing. There's this scene that goes on a bit too long where, Costner's supposed to kill the young guy. No, he's supposed to kill everybody but keep alive the young guy with the mustache. So he goes in and he wipes everybody out. But it turns out he actually kept alive a middle-aged guy with a goatee, thinking it was the young guy with the mustache. And he and Amber Heard have like a 5-minute argument about this.
Yeah, that was kind of.
And it feels forced, and it's the whole a lot of the Haley Steinfeld stuff is like that too. They really drive in this neglected daughter cliche. She even calls him by his first name.
Yep.
That whole thing. And it's worth noting, if you want to go into those references too, there's a point in time where Haley Steinfeld, to cover up she has the whole cliche of, I have to look perfect for prom and my new boyfriend that I have a crush on. And she fucks her hair all up. So she hides it with this red wig that looks a lot like Natalie Portman's hair in Leon.
Yeah, completely.
So that's probably a reference around.
I'm sure it was.
So, yeah, whatever. But there are some funny things. I wish they had done this more than once because they needed to more than once. But for some reason they didn't. It's only in one scene. There is this funny scene where Costner's talking to this guy when he first goes back to his apartment. And the guy's English is so bad. He's speaking English, and you can understand him if you really listen. But the guy's English is so bad they put up subtitles. But they only do that for one scene, even though there's a lot of scenes where people speak in really heavy accents, and you can barely understand them. And basically, and they also go into this thing where after she gives him his first shot of the thing that's supposedly going to cure his brain tumor, or at least keep it at bay, it turns into reverse crank. And he, instead of having to keep his adrenaline up, he has to keep his heart rate low, otherwise he starts to hallucinate. And of course, naturally, it's hard to keep your heart rate down when everybody's trying to kill you and you're trying to kill everybody.
But that's mentioned just once, and then it's completely dropped after that, it seems like.
And to keep the hallucinations at bay, he has to drink shots of vodka.
Yeah.
And there is a funny scene like that where it starts to happen and he has to tear through the house looking for it, and then he finally gets a drink and everything's okay. And then his wife comes back and sees the apartment a wreck, and he's having the vodka, and his simple response is, I have trouble finding the vodka. Yeah, if you're a Kevin Costner fan, I'd see this just on principle.
Yes.
Because he's in pretty much every scene, and it's always fun to see Kevin Costner kicking someone's ass, which is pretty much this entire movie.
Yes.
And Costner has this unscatable charm that withstands all. Even if this movie, even though this movie is just okay, it's probably worth seeing just because it's been a while since Costner's had he had supporting parts in Man of Steel and Jack Ryan, but now he's they're calling this a full comeback basically. So if you're a Costner fan, I would see it. Just a recommendation right there.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you'll get. There's plenty of that I'd say Costner fans are the only people I can 100% recommend it to. Everybody else, I don't think anybody dislikes Kevin Costner. If you do, shame on you. But if you don't consider yourself an overwhelming Costner fan, it's just okay. I can probably still recommend it. I mean, it's it's a fun movie. I'm not gonna and the comedy bits are fine. It's not
it's better than Ride Along.
They don't ruin the movie or anything. So it's, like I said, if you're a fan of the writer, I think you'll be perfectly fine because this fits right in with all his other movies. So it's got a real Taken vibe to it,
Yeah.
which I think he also did some writing on.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if I didn't if I didn't see McGee in the credits, I would have assumed the guy, I can't remember his name now, the guy that did Taken and From Paris with Love was the director. And it's got a really good pace too. It's almost 2 hours, but it moves along fairly well.
Yeah, it flows really nicely.
Yeah, and the action is pretty much constant. I mean, there's the moments, of course, with, you know, him and Haley Steinfeld bonding and all that, and the heartwarming moments. But for the most part, it's pretty moves along.
The squatters too. You didn't even mention that.
There is one thing I would like to point out that kind of distracted me a little bit. There's one big action scene towards the end. That's a big car chase. But like, if you haven't seen Drive, or you haven't seen Drive as many times as I have, which is like 50.
Yeah.
This won't bother you, but it bothered me as a huge fan of Drive. There is a scene where he's chasing the wolf and the albino, and this is that big car chase. And he comes up behind them and he rams them in the back, and then the car chase starts. And then, basically, I guess without giving too much away, even though I pretty much already have, the scene where he confronts Ron Perlman at the end of Drive, they basically recreated that scene and put a car chase in the middle of it. It's exactly the same. And that's what I'll say. So I found that a little distracting amidst this. I was like, wow, this is a really good action scene, but then I thought, wait a minute, they totally just threw a car chase into the middle of that scene in Drive. Just lifted it completely. So, but you know, it's perfectly fine. I can, like, if you just want to go to the movies and like you don't care too much about it being some masterpiece, this movie's perfectly fine.
You could do a lot worse right now.
Yeah. If you want to go to the movies just because, like most normal people, you just want to watch a movie, yeah, this movie's perfectly fine. So, yeah. I always feel bad for like criticizing it so much because that's not really the kind of movie it's supposed to be. So, yeah, I would say, you know,
I liked it.
yeah.
It kept my attention.
I think it should be fine for most people. Like I said, the violence is pretty hardcore for that PG-13 rating, but it's almost, I mean, there's blood there, but for the kind of violence that's in it, it's practically bloodless. So I think the most blood in it's when Costner gets a nosebleed. So, yeah.
And you can just watch kids high-five Kevin Costner every time he walks in his house.
And for some reason, he doesn't get what they're trying to do.
Nope.
So, yeah, that's pretty much that.
Okay, next week we're going to 2 more movies as well. Non-Stop, which actually is going to be watched on Thursday night. And Friday we're actually going to watch Son of God, which, yeah, 2.5 hour long film, which does... I shudder to think we have that and Noah and all sorts of other epics coming that I'm not ready for.
Well, Pompeii could have been a lot longer than it was, so I guess that's something. Pompeii's only an hour 45.
It didn't seem that long.
So, you know.
Alright, so we're under the impression that you're not recommending Pompeii at all.
I'd go to 3 Days to Kill instead if you're like trying to figure out between the two.
Or you can give the Lego Movie some more box. Because obviously everyone else is, so... It will repeat again this week. And I'm pretty sure it'll probably repeat again. Actually, I think Non-Stop may take it next week because everybody in the world loves Liam Neeson. Because they have to choose between 2 different performances, one animated and one where he's doing the Liam Neeson thing.
Either way, Liam Neeson will be fine next week.
Yes, absolutely. So, any parting words?
I think that's it.